Our guest for this week's Touch Base in Seoul is someone our long-time listeners of Korea 24 will be familiar with. This is his third time on Touch Base in Seoul, second in the studio, and he is a Korean-American filmmaker, Joseph Juhn. We first met him talking about his documentary Jeronimo, telling the story of the Korean diaspora in Cuba. Then just over a year ago, we talked about a new documentary he was working on following 5 Korean Americans running for Congress in last year's US elections. This is set to be completed later this year, but now he has added the title of writer to his CV as well. He's published a book in Korean, no less, under his Korean name, Juhn Hoo-seok, exploring what it means to be a part of the Korean diaspora. I'm delighted to say that Joseph Juhn once again joins us in the studio. Mr. Juhn, welcome back. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
It seems you've been a busy man. We spoke to you last September in 2020. You were working on the documentary, the second documentary, I understand. How have you been? What have you been up to?
Just working on the film, try to complete the film as quickly as possible. I'm at the tail end of editing process, so I'm hoping, knocking woods, the film will be done by the end of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So done by the end of this year, and perhaps we'll get to see it. People will get to see it towards the end of the year, beginning of next year. And I understand you've been in Korea for quite some time this time as well.
I spent about 3 months. In fact, I got here to edit my second film with my Korean-Canadian editor, who joined me all the way from Toronto. So we spent about 2.5 months editing away. And the rest of time, I spent time basically going around promoting my book. And yeah.
So on that, while you've been working on a documentary, you've also written a book. Where do you find the time?
I actually have a lot of time. People, tend to mistake that I am extremely busy. In some cases, I could be, but before I began my second film project, I had about 7 months of hiatus. Since the last showing of Jeronimo, there's COVID, and I was left basically wondering what should be my next steps. But luckily, a Korean publisher approached me and asked me if I wanted to chronicle my diasporic experiences and write a book on Korean diaspora, and I was happy to do so.
Right, it's an essay book. It's called, in Korean, 당신의 수식어. Our producer had translated it to words that describe you, but the literal translation would be closer to something a bit more cumbersome, your noun modifiers as such. How would you translate it?
Oh man, it's tough. Maybe you're a modifier?
Your modifier.
Maybe, yeah. Would that be a fair translation?
Sure. But our producer, I guess, wanted a bit more less cumbersome, to call it the words that describe you. Yeah. So tell us more about it. What is it about?
So it's about my experiences of running into and building friendships with various types of Koreans around the world, right? At the end of which I ran into a Korean Cuban, which turned into a film. But, making of Jeronimo was not a beginning, but it was, in fact, the outcome of all the accumulated experiences that I had previously prior to running into a Korean Cuban. So I just wanted to recount my limited understandings of what it means to be a part of Korean diaspora at the time, and which became all the more clear as I was working on Jeronimo. Yeah.
So you approached to write this, as you said, by publishers. Was it something you jumped on right away? Was it something that you wanted to do?
Absolutely.
Well, can you tell us more why?
Sure. I always felt the need to really chronicle the 3 years that I spent making this film, because the changes were all too sudden, and it's something that I had not planned, right? As someone likes to call it, I was led by a spirit without making it sound too religious or spiritual, because I'm not saying that. I was led by something to really delve into this project, and I just gave everything into the project, right? It was a conscious choice, certainly, but I was just so happy to do it. And just looking back, I felt the need to do it, and I like writing. So when a publisher approached me, it was a no-brainer.
As I mentioned, you wrote it and published it in Korean under your Korean name, Juhn Hoo-seok, which was a surprise to me, because I understand your films were in English, and you normally talk about yourself as a Korean American. Why did you feel that you wanted to write a book in Korean for a Korean audience?
Primarily because I was approached by a Korean publisher. I am tossing around ideas these days as to whether it is a possibility for me to also publish the book in English, because the primary target audience, I guess the biggest beneficiary of my book and my experiences would actually be the younger generation Korean Americans or whoever that can read English. So it's in the works, but I also wanted to tell my, I guess, Korean audiences or Korean readers that, diasporic identity, diasporic consciousness is not something that only pertains to people who live outside of the Korean Peninsula, but it's also an idea that people living here can benefit from, right? So it's a universal concept, and I wanted to really delve into the concept of diaspora.
It sounds like that it might have come from perhaps some frustrations you might have experienced speaking to other Koreans about the Korean diaspora, about where you're from, trying to explain that you're Korean American, trying to explain your films about Korean Cubans.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when I talk to Koreans about the concept of diaspora, a lot of people take it as a geographical, sometimes political or social concept, which is definitely the case, which is true. But moreover, there's a philosopher that appears in my book who described the concept of diaspora in the following. He said, "Joseph, I'm not a member of diaspora according to your definition, because I was born and raised in Korea and I still continue to live here. I'm not a member of diaspora according to a geographical or political or social concept. But I strive to live as a member of diaspora every day, meaning whenever I wake up, I try to move away from the center and try to go to the margins. Whenever I feel comfortable, I try to feel uncomfortable. Whenever I become part of the mainstream, I try to be a member of minority. I challenge the status quo every day. In that sense, to me, diaspora is a philosophical, almost existential concept, right? So the point he was trying to make was that diaspora is not just yours. It doesn't pertain only to those who live outside of the peninsula. It's a concept that everyone can benefit from, right? And so when I heard that, I realized that the potential of what the term diaspora can do to not only people who live outside of Korea, but those within.
Do you agree with his interpretation of what it means to be a diaspora? What is your interpretation of
Absolutely,
being part of diaspora?
I agree, because he expanded who can qualify as members of diaspora, right? And the reason I keep emphasizing the term diaspora is because I think it's a useful tool for us to get to cosmopolitanism or global citizenship. I mean, we talk about how Korea is becoming more diverse as years go by, and we talk about how to coexist with different types of Koreans. I mean, Afghans that recently came to Korea, I mean, there's a huge uproar online if you read the commentaries or comments. The general response is very hostile still, right? But how do we...
Sure, there has been positive responses as well.
Absolutely.
People trying to help, especially from that situation. But there is, of course, that vocal group that is against evacuees and refugees coming to Korea.
I would like to think that they're on the fringes. But, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, right? But you're right. Since the arrival of the Yemenis refugees 5 years ago, I think our general response has been a lot more positive and welcoming. So I see that as a step forward and a positive sign, definitely. But, the point I was trying to make was that we'll have more of these newcomers coming into Korea going forward. And we have to continue to think, what are some of the philosophical tools that we can use to coexist peacefully and to practice hospitality towards these newcomers. And I think diasporic consciousness has a role to play.
So do you think attitudes are changing? You mentioned how it's different with the Yemeni refugees 5 years ago as to how the Afghan evacuees are being treated this time. Do you think, from your experiences, you found that Korean people have perhaps changing their attitudes towards the Korean diaspora?
To be honest, it's splitting hair. I hope so. I pray so. But to be extremely frank with you, I think the way in which Koreans perceive, let's say, Korean ethnic Chinese people in Korea is still a huge issue. It's very problematic. The way the media portrays a lot of Korean ethnic Chinese or others, North Korean defectors and so forth, we still have a long way to go. Yeah.
How have people responded to your book so far? Has it been what you expected, or have they perhaps seen it in different lights?
I've been getting generally good responses, but can I share with you like an episode?
Sure.
That have really made me gratified about the whole book writing process. In fact, it just happened a couple of weeks ago. I was asked by a high school in Cheonan to speak to their students. It happened over Zoom. The teacher distributed my book very gratefully to the students, and students submitted dokugam, which is book review, and the teacher shared those comments with me. Well, two of the students specifically said, after reading the book, my prejudices and my hostility towards 조선족, Korean ethnic Chinese, have disappeared. Or
how old were these students?
They were 16, 17.
Okay, so around high school age.
Yeah. But reading that commentaries, I felt most joyous out of any other feedback that I received from anyone. So if I can change one person's perception or prejudice, I think my job is done. Yeah,
exactly. Reaching that one person pretty much justifies what you would have gone through to write this book as well, which I'm sure would have been quite a process.
Absolutely.
So, as you said, you do have plans to consider writing this book in English, or something in English as well, right?
Yeah. If there's an English publisher that wants to turn this into an English book, then I'll be happy to participate. For now, I don't have an immediate plan to transcribe or translate this directly into English. But when the time comes, I'm happy to begin that process.
And now that you've published this book, what else is next for you? As you said, you're still working on that documentary, Chosen. Do you have any other projects lined up? Do you plan to write something else more?
No, I'm still giving birth to Chosen. So
a phrase you used last time.
Did I?
Yes, on our show. You said making a film is, making a documentary like this is like a process of giving birth.
Like I know, right? But I think, another baby cannot be conceived while I'm still giving birth to the second child. So we'll see. The best scenario would be to be able to sell my film to one of the larger streaming sites. But that's wishful thinking now. I have a job to finish and to make it a presentable product.
We look forward to seeing that. It's been really great to have you on the show again and to be able to follow your career like this as well. And we look forward to having you on the show again when your next project is ready. We've been speaking to filmmaker and writer Joseph Juhn for Touch Base in Seoul. Mr. Juhn, thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thanks again.